I'm not going to repeat that previous introduction of how the committee came to put this bill together, but I do want to talk about, first of all, the principles under which we looked at various pieces of legislation from other states or put this bill together. Let me say that first of all and foremost, it was our commitment to honor the will of the sovereign voters of the state of Montana who did make this a legal act in the state of Montana. And we viewed it as our responsibility, therefore, to try to make it work for the people of Montana. That's what we do as legislators. So this is not the repeal bill. If a repealer goes through, then this goes to the side. But if repeal does not happen, there are issues that have to be fixed. And that's what we were focused on trying to provide. The areas we looked at that we think need to be addressed here that are included in this bill, we're providing for increased health and safety protections for medical marijuana cardholders and for the general public through things such as the previous bill having to do with the Indoor Clean Air Act. We also created within this bill a regulatory system for licensing and oversight of an emerging medical marijuana industry. And I'm going to talk more about these issues as we go through it. We also sought to clarify a number of gray areas in the law, including such issues as the authority of the local government of Montana to regulate for issues of health, safety, location, etc. And finally, to establish to the greatest degree possible as clean and bright a line as we could create between legally protected medical marijuana and illegal cultivation, possession, or sale of medical marijuana. And that's somewhat of a difficult task when you're sort of coming out of prohibition. The committee believed that House Bill 68 provides a framework for accomplishing those goals demanded by the public and the institutions of our state that have the responsibility for our public health and safety and our responsibility to enact and enable the will of the people to be in place. I'm not going to go through all those pages section by section, and I'm also not going to go through the 8-page fiscal note, which I only recently got at this point, and we can do some of that in executive action. But I am going to highlight some of the key provisions of the bill. Let me go back to the creating of a licensing and regulatory structure for the medical marijuana industry. You know, when the interim committee first started looking at this issue, like many of the people I think that voted for this, we thought that this was going to be someone growing some medical marijuana for, maybe family members or something like that. No one envisioned that we would see the explosion in the medical marijuana industry that we now have with approximately 29,000 people who have cards and a significant number of businesses growing up around that to provide medical marijuana, both growers and dispensaries and labs and medical producers, and that those need to be regulated. We looked at all of the other states and in many ways adopted what we thought was the best practices out there, which at this point really is the Colorado model, and that also fit nicely, and we tried to work with it in terms of the models we already have in Montana for the regulation of alcohol and gambling, those two in the Department of Revenue. So after looking at a number of agencies, we put the responsibility for this new regulatory structure in the Department of Revenue, which does have extensive experience in licensing, regulating, and providing financial audits and those kinds of things, and collecting taxes on what may be a $50 to $100 million unregulated cash industry at this point. No one knows how much money is out there because we have no numbers to actually account for that cash. And that's growing as the number of people who have cards and go into these businesses. The amount of unregulated money out there is a very serious concern. The licensure system that we propose creates a tiered system for the growing and selling of medical marijuana. It's a system that provides for the regulation of providers, who are the ones who, at this point, basically sell it for individual card holders, dispensaries, infused medical products. That'll be a new one for some of you. These are the folks that take marijuana and convert it into tinctures and other kinds of edibles, and also for the growers, either with dispensaries or for a manufacturer. So there's regulations applying to each of those categories. We also establish regulations for people who are applying to be one of those businesses in various ways, primarily for health and safety and to ensure that the criminal element is clearly separated from this industry. And I'll just list a few of the things that are in the bill. You have to submit fingerprints for a national 50-state criminal background check. You may not have a felony conviction of any kind. You may not be on probation or parole or under the supervision of the youth court. You have to be a 2-year Montana resident to apply to go into this business. You can't be licensed if you haven't paid your Montana taxes, your court-ordered child support, or your student loans that you owe to the society and the state. And finally, one of the big ones, you have to have transparency in the financing and operation of this. So full disclosure of the names of all people affiliated with the business, including all of those who have money going into this business, in the interest of making sure that, again, we have separated as much as possible illegal elements from what would be a legal business operating in the state of Montana. And finally, we require the Department of Revenue to monitor those license holders through quarterly reports for sales, revenue, the number of plants, and doing inspection on premises and audit. They have a lot of experience doing that already with these other operations. We think they're very qualified to do that. So that's over on that side. Then in the side of the issuing of cards, that responsibility in this bill remains with the Department of Health and Human Services, who have the responsibility at this point for the issuing of a medical marijuana card, sometimes referred to as a green card. We require that the applicants for those cards be Montana residents, and we consulted with a number of physicians, including those from the Board of Medical Examiners, about the list that's currently in the law about who would qualify for this, and have a little bit of cleanup in there. There's a little bit of, we include Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, there's a couple of things like that, but we also corrected some of the medical terminology that wasn't quite on. Then we established new requirements for physicians under this, and I think this is of critical importance. We worked with the Board of Medical Examiners to establish what's called a standard of care for what an appropriate and competent medical exam must consist of. And this addresses that issue of kind of, a 5-minute meeting with a physician, maybe not even in person, and then the issuing of cards. So it's setting a higher standard there that would be important for ensuring that people actually have their health conditions taken fully into effect with the issuing of these cards. We also put into the bill that a physician may have no financial ties to the medical marijuana industry. In other words, if you're a grower or dispenser, you can't hire a physician, bring him in, and either pay them by the head or pay them at all. This has to be an independent physician who is doing this. And I'm glad to tell you that there are over 350 physicians in the state who currently have written letters of certification, and around 300 of them have done for 20 or fewer people. That is exactly what was envisioned initially. They're doing it for their own patients. We have a very small number of physicians who are writing for, say, 100 or more, and we need to address that separately, and we do. For chronic pain, which is one of the largest categories for which people are currently getting cards, we're requiring a 2-physician certification for that. We also require the physicians have to have an office in Montana and not be co-located anywhere that medical marijuana is either grown or sold. And we provide limits on the amount of usable marijuana a person may purchase. At the moment, the same number of plants is in both bills, but currently we say 1 ounce. But it doesn't say 1 ounce every day, 1 ounce every month. It doesn't limit that. So in this one, we set a limit of 2 ounces a month rather than the current unlimited amount. That may not be enough for some people, but it certainly at least starts establishing some line, and I know a lot of people want to address that. The other issue in the bill is that we give express authority to local governments to regulate medical marijuana. All of us have seen what's going on in all of our communities with knowing where they can be located or can you ban them from your community. We give express permission to establish business licensing requirements, building codes, health and safety standards, restrictions on location. The other thing we do is we say, if this is the law of the state of Montana, it applies to everyone in the state of Montana. You can't just decide to ban it, push it out of the city limits, and pretend just because it's across the city limits boundary, it's not impacting your community. We need to deal with this issue in all of our communities. Then there are a number of other gray areas we tried to clarify. I think one of the biggest ones is The issue of people who are in the control of the Department of Corrections or Youth Court who currently have cards. We have people who are in court-ordered drug and alcohol treatment and in our facilities who have a medical marijuana card. It's an untenable situation, and we prohibit that, absolutely, both for people who have cards and for anyone who wants to grow or sell medical marijuana. We also, in terms of law enforcement, repeal the affirmative defense, which a person could raise that they don't have a card. And initially it was, you get stopped on the highway, you got marijuana, you don't have a card, you say, well, I could get a card. Our view is that is still just too darn gray. You can always go to court and make your case if you're qualified, but you either have a driver's license or you don't. You either have a medical marijuana card or you don't. So we repeal that. And finally, as you saw in the others, the other bill prohibited or included medical marijuana in the Clean Air Act. We also, in this bill, prohibit it as all public smoking and in areas where it affects other people. That's clearly been a concern of a lot of people. There are many other areas in the bill. It's a long bill. We can talk more about it in executive action. This bill is not as stringent as some would like and probably liberal enough for others, but we think it's a reasonable attempt to address these significant issues. And before we hear from the public, let me add that the committee did believe that there is a legitimate need for the use of medical marijuana. We didn't vote to repeal it. We do believe that the majority of the physicians who have provided certification are doing a good job for their patients. You got some bad actors, but most of them are doing what was intended. And that the majority of caregivers or providers are responsible people. However, the complete lack of regulation in this area has created both the perception that medical marijuana is out of control and a complete inability by all of our normal institutions and systems to rein in the bad actors out there. We need clarification and regulations provided in this bill. Whether you keep them in this bill, they go out into other bills, that is the gift the interim committee gives you is the research is done. Do with it as you will. I'll be available during executive action, so I think there's really no need for all of you to ask me a question in the interim, but to ask the people who are here who may not stay with us. So I really look forward to hearing their testimony and the questions from the committee to them. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.